Bob and his partner, Dave, his neighbor, and we both, each of our own boats, went down the Kokolik together. And that was the first time for me in Alaska in the far north. Kokolik is smaller than the Noatak, and only navigable in the spring, summer. And on that trip, we witnessed the caribou migration over the ridge, across the river, and we're awed. And so the only other time let's see, that was my first experience with grizzlies, because I had always paddled on the shore with polar bears, but not grizzlies. And so the only other time that I saw that many caribou was on the copper mine, but never the migration. So I was sold. Like many of you, the young girls that we had, we started training them on southern Canadian rivers, and then as they became young women, and year after year, they came back to explore a little farther north. We were just all pulled a little farther north, a little farther north. The landscape and the critters and the midnight sun on the river spoke to us. So with this trip, we were both eager to have another opportunity to be present to what the tender would share. And sadly, 2 years later, because of COVID, Nancy was unable to go on this trip. And because she's the Vermont Health Department communication director, and the unpredictable nature of the pandemic, she just couldn't be away. And for me, that was a significant change. We were the eldest on the trip, and I had come to know in the last few years, us too, as experienced wilderness travelers, that we decided we could do anything if we do it slow enough. And now I was with nobody who could hike my pace. And so what that meant was I felt with the in-reach communication and within the group and the detailed maps from Andy Jenks, and I felt fine that we would keep track of our whereabouts if I was alone hiking. But the possible grizzly encounters were the biggest puzzle for me. And on this trip, I hiked a few times with the group, but often alone. But last story, my Arctic trips 3 years pre-pandemic, I had gotten to know grizzlies in the Dubont River, the Hanbury River, and the Falon River. And this trip had the most grizzlies I've ever seen on one trip. And they behaved just like the Park Service suggested. Give them a warning if you're coming through the willows. Speak boldly and directly to them when you have a sighting, and widen your distance as soon as possible. And the bears simply walked away.
Wow. Wow.
So I'm Lyndon Torsenson, and with Whitney, we've done a number of traveling expeditions and trips on rivers and hiking in various places. But this is a trip that caught our attention 5 or 6, 7 years ago. So we've been planning it ever since. I'm a retired park ranger from the Mississippi National River and Recreation Area. And I'm enjoying retirement and now have more time to do things like this. But I'm really excited to share with you this trip and excited that we have a lot of people here to join us. I want to turn it over to Whitney Clark, who is 5th member of our team here, and maybe to Brad as well, to have them introduce themselves.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear, can everybody in the room hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Great. Well, great to be with you, if only virtually. Unfortunately, I was really looking forward to being in the room with you all tonight, but I got COVID this week. So fortunately, it's a mild case, and I'm feeling good. But I'm not going to share my little virus buddies with you tonight. And I note that we've got 31 online participants, lots of friends and relatives online. So really glad that all of you folks could partake in this. It's one of the silver linings of COVID is we're learning how to do these hybrid events. So Whitney Clark, one of the members of this trip, and I have always resonated with something E.B. White said, which was, I rise each day torn between the desire to improve the world and the desire to enjoy it. And so my day job, I work for a river conservation organization here in the Twin Cities, Friends of the Mississippi River. And whenever I can, I get to the wilderness for my spiritual practice. So I will maybe turn it over to Brad to introduce himself.
Hi, Brad Murray. I grew up in the Twin Cities and wish I were there with you all, but I live in North Carolina these days, so joining remotely. I spent a lot of time in the Arctic and in alpine environments, especially a lot of Arctic places in early parts of my life, and was thrilled at the unexpected opportunity to get to go up there again. I spent time in places including the Brooks Range a few times, including some with my very close buddy Whitney, and some other fantastic times with my very close buddy Dhaivyd, and was really happy to be able to join a trip with Randee, who I've known for a very long time, and it was thrilled to meet Lyndon and Jon. I'm a geomorphologist by training. I'm a researcher, a professor at Duke University, and I study landscape, how landscapes come to look the way they do, and especially river processes. And so I get to pretend that I can say something about why things work the way they do or look the way they do if you have questions on those realms. And
Okay.
MC Dhaivyd.
Well, I think maybe before we start running the slides, I might just do a brief, just sort of set this up a little bit. Some of what I was going to say has sort of been covered, so I'll skip through some of this. But as you have learned from some of these introductions, some of the trip mates have been friends for decades, and in different combinations, most of us had done wilderness trips together in the past. All of us have had at least some backcountry wilderness expedition experience, and several of us, as you just learned, have paddled a number of far north rivers in Canada and Alaska before we got together this past summer. Lyndon had previously visited Gates of the Arctic on a backpacking trip some decades ago, and as Brad just mentioned, back in 1987, he and I spent 3 brilliant weeks backpacking in the Anahtuvik Valley further north and east in Gates of the Arctic National Park, but we hadn't been back since 35 years. And Lyndon and I have done many wilderness trips together over the past 30 years, and one of the things we do when we're on the trail together is talk about future trips that we'd like to do. So we had both heard good things about the Noatak River from people who have done it. And some years back, Lyndon attended a presentation about it that kind of piqued his interest and helped solidify the Noatak as a priority expedition to do someday. The Noatak has, as you're about to see, has tons of appealing attributes. First of all, it's very remote, and to the extent that you can say this about any place on the planet anymore, it's still largely pristine and intact wilderness. The entire watershed of the river is federally protected, and Lyndon, I think, is going to say a little bit more about that in a bit. It boasts the full assemblage of charismatic megafauna such as grizzly bears, caribou, muskox, wolves, Dall sheep, moose. It's entirely free-flowing, and it's fun to paddle with lots of rapids and, really importantly, no portages. So, you can see some of the things that attracted us to the trip. Another thing was that because it is difficult and expensive to get to, it isn't too crowded with other visitors, or at least we hoped it wouldn't be. Not that many groups descend the Noatak each year, so we thought we maybe would have the place to ourselves. So as Lyndon mentioned, it was 5 or 6 years ago that Lyndon and I started seriously planning the trip, working through the complex logistics, talking to others who had done the Noatak, and putting together our team. If you're going to paddle most of the length of the river as we wanted to, 335 miles, it requires a good amount of time, 3 to 4 weeks to travel that distance, depending on how much you want to take time off to hike and sightsee and relax. So 3 to 4 weeks for paddling the river, plus getting to and from Northwest Alaska takes several days on each end. So it takes some planning, and not everybody can get away for 4 or 5 weeks. So as we were planning the canoe portion of the trip, I stumbled on the possibility of adding a separate component to the front end of the trip, a backpacking trip, where some of us would hike, where we would finish our hike at the headwaters of the Noatak and begin the canoe trip portion of the trip from there. So that's what we did. Eventually, 3 of us, Jon, Lyndon, and myself, added a 6-day trek onto the beginning of the trip. We would fly to Alaska about a week before the other 3 and have a float plane drop us at the headwaters of the Alatna River, from which point we would hike through the Brooks Range over the divide into the Noatak River Valley and meet our paddling friends, who would fly in with our 3 canoes and food and gear for a 23-day canoe trip. So that's the outline of the trip. Why don't we show you some slides?
We'll try to show you some slides.
David, do you want to be able to get rid of that Zoom bar or no?
I think we need to leave the Zoom bar
Okay.
so those guys can participate.
So the entirety of our trip is north of the Arctic Circle. Bettles is in the wrong location on that map. It's actually in the southeastern corner of Gates of the Arctic National Park, which is identified on the map. But you can see the overall place where we are in the Arctic of Alaska.
We spent a lot of time planning this trip, and this is during the pandemic. And there are a number of different years when we had been planning to go and did not go because of primarily the pandemic. And so we were doing a lot of Zoom sessions to do planning for this trip, and just got a screenshot of us because I don't know how many hours we spent doing this, but it was a lot. So this is, we actually have a lot of images of food, but this is the only one that we kept in the slideshow, because this represents one of the ways that we created our food for the trip. So we had to have food for the entire time that Whitney laid out. And one of the techniques for doing that was to create full meals. And I'm vegan, and so everyone was creating vegan meals for this entire trip. And we would create our meals and dry them in an air dryer, a dehydrator, and then pack them up with desiccants and freeze them. And then we ended up shipping off all of our stuff several weeks in advance of our trip up to the place that was going to be flying us in from Bettles to our put-in. So this all had to be prepared well in advance. And this is an example of the food. This is lasagna. It ended up being lasagna soup, of course.
I thought you might make us guess what the meal that was.
All right, so as Whitney said, Jon and Whitney and I started our trip at the Alatna River. And so we started at the headwaters of the Alatna, which is at the beginning of that blue line toward the top. The Alatna River flows down to the Koyukuk and then into the Yukon and then ultimately into the Pacific Ocean, the Bering Sea. But both the Alatna and the Noatak River are national wild rivers. So they're administered by the National Park Service as a part of the National Wild and Scenic River System. And that means that the National Park Service is about keeping these rivers in a free-flowing natural state. The Noatak, as Whitney also identified, encircles the watershed or the basin of the Noatak River, except for the part that's already protected within Gates of the Arctic National Park. It's the largest watershed that's undisturbed, undeveloped in the United States. And the Noatak River, Noatak meaning passage to the interior in the Inupiaq language, Noatak flows to the west and hits the Chukchi Sea of the Arctic Ocean. So therefore, when we're hiking down the Alatna River, ultimately, in order to get to the Noatak, we cross over a continental divide because these two rivers are going different places. Next. Gates of the Arctic National Park has a number of great things going in its favor, in my opinion. The first one being that it's the second largest national park, next only to Wrangell St. Elias in terms of size. It's also the least visited national park in the United States. And when you combine Gates of the Arctic with the Noatak National Preserve, you have the largest wilderness in the United States. And so this is a great area in that respect. Gates of the Arctic is also a place where there's no roads, no trails. So you're really making your own way. The one thing to mention is most of it is wilderness, but one piece of it is not wilderness up by Anaktuvuk Pass, and that area around Anaktuvuk is a native-owned corporation, which is the Nunavut Inupiat, which they have they own the land, and they have subsistence rights for hunting, fishing, gathering, and so forth in that area. But I want to say some other things about the national park. So both of these are national wild rivers. You have a national preserve, and then Gates of the Arctic National Park. National Park Service is really all about, in its mission, to protect these places in a way that's leaves them pristine. What's the word I'm looking for? David, unsullied. Yeah, unsullied. Well, in the climate change world, we really can't exactly do that, can we? To keep them, completely protected. And so what did the United Nations Secretary General say a few days ago? He said, we're on a highway to climate hell, and with our foot on the accelerator or something like that. And no place is affected any more than the Arctic. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster. Arctic Alaska has warmed 7 degrees already. So the question is just, what did we see and learn and do on our trip relative to climate change? So I just want to be real brief about this, but it's kind of like the elephant in the room, because everything in the Arctic is now affected by climate change. So 3 things that we saw and learned. First thing is fires. Before we even left, we saw maps of Alaska with hundreds of fires, air quality advisories, and air quality advisories in places that we were going to, like Bettles and Fairbanks. We flew into Fairbanks, and when we landed in Fairbanks, Jon and Whitney and I landed in a fog of smoke from these fires. We flew from Fairbanks to Bettles, and then from Bettles into Gates of the Arctic, and saw the fires. We landed in Bettles, and there were giant firefighting aircraft that were coming and going. They were refueling in Bettles, and then going off and scooping up water and dumping it on the fires, and would kind of blow away our gear, if we weren't careful when they were taking off. It was kind of a dust storm. So we saw a lot of activity around fires. Second thing is we saw a lot of slumping and erosion. So when we're on a hike, we had to do a traverse across an area to get down into the Noatak River area to join up with our buddies. And it was as if we had to cross a glacier with crevasses, except of course it wasn't snow and ice. It was crevasses of mud, and we had to kind of negotiate and navigate a way to get around this sort of glacier of slumping what had been permafrost. Also when we were paddling, we oftentimes saw eroding riverbanks, and sometimes as if glaciers were calving into water, chunks of the riverbank were falling into the rivers. So we saw those things. We also learned about caribou migration, and how the caribou are changing significantly in their patterns of movement in the Arctic. The caribou in this area is the Western Arctic caribou herd, the largest in the world, 490,000 caribou at one time in 2003. Now it's 164,000, I think. But they cross the Noatak River twice. The fall migration leads them back south, and it used to happen starting in mid-August. Now it's late September, October, even November, and they used to cross the Kobuk River on their way to their wintering grounds in the Seward Peninsula, but now aren't even crossing the Kobuk, so they aren't going down into the Seward Peninsula. All of this in turn affects Native people who depend on being able to hunt caribou and find them in certain timing and so on. So a lot of ramifications from these kinds of things. So what did we do as far as our response to this? Well, we bought carbon offsets because we realized that our contribution to this was we're putting out 2 metric tons of carbon in traveling to do this trip. Each, yeah, 2 metric tons each, which is as much as many people contribute all year. Many people in the world contribute that in a whole year. So we needed to mitigate for that somehow. So we bought carbon offsets. There are many reputable outfits out there that do the carbon offsets. Those that are reputable are third-party certified, like Sustainable Travel International. And the third-party certified is to the permanence of their projects that they undertake, and to the additionality of those projects. That is, they wouldn't happen were it not for the contributions that we make toward those carbon offset projects. So that was one thing. The other thing we did was we ate vegan, which lowered our carbon budget as well. So those were some of the aspects of climate change as it relates to all of this. It only cost us $35 to get the carbon offset, by the way. So we all have to neutralize our carbon output. So carbon offsets are one way to do it.
Just 35 each for
$35 each for that travel. So I'd be happy to talk with anybody about that more, but not right now, because we have a lot of beautiful slides to see. So let's get back to our trip and see where we went. Whitney, do you want to talk about the inReach and what this represents?
Yeah, sure. So, and I think Randee mentioned this a little bit, referenced it. We had a number of satellite communication devices known as inReach that allowed us to, drop a pin, which is what you're looking at here. So this is the Noatak River. These are our campsites that we had along the river, the pins we dropped. They also allowed us to communicate via SMS text between each other while we were out, which we utilized to make sure that that our rendezvous went smoothly. But we could also communicate back home with friends and family to let them know we were safe. So this is just the pins that Jon dropped from our Alatna from the hiking portion of the trip. So you can see the one in the top upper right there that's labeled number 2. That was our that was our first night there, where the float plane dropped us at that little lake that you can see there, Gadecki Lake. We hiked night 2 and night 3 down the Alatna, and then we took a right turn and went up and over the divide. As Lyndon was saying, we camped at the top of the divide, and you'll see pictures of that. Dropped down the other side, and then the one at the bottom labeled 2 is the rendezvous site with our full group at Pingo Lake. We'll go to the next slide. This is our packing out in Bettles at the airfield in Bettles, Alaska. It was this airline that we shipped all of our food and gear to about a month before we had to be there. And then, of course, when we got there, we had to unpack it all and separate it into the different portions of the trip and then fly out with it. This is us heading out. This is the Beaver and our pilot, Alana. This is obviously from the airplane flying up the Alatna River toward our drop-off spot through the Brooks Range. The ruggedy Arrogech Peaks. This image allows you to see some of these peat fires smoldering along the air route as we flew in. And this is approaching our drop-off spot on Gadecki Lake, which is right at the height of land at the headwaters of 3 different rivers in the Brooks Range. And you can see she's circling around there. That's where we began our trip. And this is the moment where the moment of no return, where we realized, okay, I guess we're doing this. We're watching the plane fly away, and we've starting our trip. Of course, as soon as we landed, the temperature dropped and the rain started coming down. I think it was in the low 40s and raining when we got there. Anybody else want to pick this up? Lyndon or John?
What's your back weight?
Oh, I think 50 on my part, maybe a few pounds more than that. John, maybe a couple pounds lighter. And
I thought with water, I was probably a little over 50, although I was considerably lighter than the other 2 hikers with my pack. But water probably put us over 50 pounds.
And unfortunately, I was more like 75 pounds. So I'm still learning how to do this.
So I'll just say a few things about this terrain. You can keep on moving the slides too, David. But it's rugged hiking. There aren't trails, and so we're trying to pick our way through a combination of tussocks, which are very difficult to walk on because they're tufts of grass that can be, a foot or more in height. And they're not quite stable enough to walk on, but then you can't always see where the floor of the solid ground is below the tussocks.
If it's solid.
And then you're also walking occasionally in what seems to be boggy areas that are quite wet. And so you're picking your way through different kinds of terrain. We're also hiking a lot through thickets of alders and willows. But otherwise, the scrubby brush is dwarf birch for the most part. We crossed some tributary creeks here that were flowing into the Alatna. I think, in fact, this one might be the Wayhawk River, if I remember right. But always just signs of wildlife, you know, everywhere. Obviously, caribou, you know, have come through here many times, and their signs are still there.
I brought Crocs. There was much debate about what footwear to use to cross rivers. They had kind of like neoprene booties with some rubber sole tread. I just brought Crocs, and that worked out okay.
Are you working at the wildflower?
Yeah, so that head net, I'd say on the Alatna, yeah, we had bugs. We had bugs much of the Alatna hike. I think I wore that head net for 4 or 5 days straight.
Mosquitoes?
Yeah, yeah, the black flies were there maybe a day or two, but never really a bother. It was the mosquitoes.
And these wildflowers that you asked, they are dwarf fireweed, also known as river beauty. Wonderful flower that you see often around in these areas. Off ice.
Yeah, so this is a shot of Jon exploring the off ice. This is spelled AUFEIS, and it's a unique ice formation that you see in along Arctic rivers, and it forms in the winter as the rivers freeze. But of course, rivers are still flowing underneath, and what happens sometimes is the water will flow up over the ice and then refreeze, and then you get that happens many times, and so you get these successive layers of freezing ice. And then, you know, in the spring, as it warms up and the rest of the snow and ice melts, you've got this concentrated chunk of ice that can last sometimes all the way through the summer. So you know, this is mid-July, or maybe July 18th or 19th, something like that. And you can see it's still lots of ice there.
So we're still above tree line here, but getting down to the point where we're beginning to see trees that are above shrub height. The value of a bug shirt cannot be underrated. Wow. This is where we are about to leave the Alatna River. And you can see here some poplar trees growing on the river banks. Continental Divide.
This was so then basically heading in towards the horizon is Portage Creek, and we will follow that creek down to the Noatak. So this is the Continental Divide between the Alatna and the Noatak. And so we would get to set up camp by 5:30, probably at the latest. We'd be done with dinner by 6:37. And remember, we're above the Arctic Circle, so we would all have sleep masks because it would never get dark. But it was kind of raining, and it was 7 o'clock, and I was like, "We're on the Continental Divide, you know. We got to go see it." And but I was the only one who was that motivated. It was raining, and the bugs were out. But I hiked up, you know, another 1,000 feet, and but this cloud ceiling was super low. There was haze in the air from fires, and the mosquitoes were so bad. I had a head net on much of the time, so really it was a wonderful hike, but I saw nothing. And came back down. Actually, that's when it did start raining on me as I was descending. So these guys opted to stay in the tent, but there was that, you know, you had several hours of daylight into the evening. I mean, it would really never, in these early days of the hike, it wasn't getting dark at all. Anyways.
Yeah, so the bugs were bad. It's raining. We finished dinner, and Jon John says to Lyndon and I, well, I've still got some energy. You guys want to go up to the top of that peak? And Lyndon and I looked at each other and we're kind of like, well, maybe not. Maybe we'll just head to the tent and you go for it.
That was the best I could do, was this selfie. I pulled the headnet up, grabbed the phone. You can see the bugs all over my back, on the bag, in the air. They were just nasty. It was one of the worst days for bugs.
You sure those aren't like birds and airplanes?
That one looks as big as you.
Whitney
So-
always finishes his lunch. He even gnaws at these, he doesn't eat much after he's done with lunch.
Yeah, the eye socket is always the juiciest. One of the nice things about, if you go back to that slide, one of the nice things about the tundra is, there's everything that happens on the tundra is kind of left on the tundra. And so as you walk along, you find the bleached bones of animals that, have died either recently or possibly, ages ago. Everything is sort of out on the surface and easy to see. And so it's endlessly fascinating as you walk along to just see the diversity of vegetation, all the forbs, wildflowers, the different mosses. It really is endlessly interesting.
Noatak Valley to the right, this is our last camp on Portage Creek. Lovely spot where two creeks meet.
And now a sudden switch. We came across this incredible house in the middle of Portage Creek. Now, so this is now switching back to Fairbanks, where the paddlers are meeting at this hostel. And we got together and went out to go see A Midsummer's Night Dream. It was very wet and cold, and we made it halfway through A Midsummer Night's Dream before we headed back down the hill to the hostel. And then we flew from Fairbanks to Bettles, and this is just an example of the meandering of the streams throughout this area, rivers and streams. And when we made it to Bettles, we had this note awaiting us, and I guess you can read that hopefully from where you're sitting. But it was great to have that kind of communication. And we did end up communicating via InReach Messenger as well. And the big question here was, is the water high or the water low? Because that would make a difference for where we would be meeting up, whether it would be at the 12 Mile or at Pingo, which is where we did end up going. So 12 Mile Creek was too low water. They would not be able to fly in there. So we ended up meeting up at Pingo. This is it's stretching it to call Bettles a town, because there are not many structures in the town other than aviation outfits. But this is Brooks Range that we chose to fly us into the put-in. We had to fly in two planes because of the quantity of equipment that we had. We had our pack boats with us, along with all, the food for the 23-day trip. Actually, we brought food for 26 days in case we had to continue on past Noatak Village, because there had been quarantines from Noatak Village during the pandemic, and in which case we would have had to continue for another 3 days. But we did end up getting to Noatak Village, so we had leftover food, but better safe than sorry. So that's the tiny plane that I got to co-pilot. But I was able to take shots of the other plane in the air. And here is the first meeting of the paddlers and the paddlers only and the hikers. This is Pingo Lake where we met. It's some beautiful reflections in the lake.
There's the bingo.
And there's the bingo.
Brad, you want to tell us about pingos?
Sure. So there must have been a lake there at one point. A lot of lakes form here where, because the rivers meander so thoroughly and rapidly that they cut off big loops. And when they cut off a big loop, the former bit of river becomes a lake. And when there's a lake, it changes the thermal state of the ground and you absorb a whole lot more radiation than you do without a lake. And so it stays warmer, and the permafrost surrounds the lake and is underneath the lake, but not in the lake. And if the lake starts to dry, you can start to form some ice in the mud that's down below. And there's a tendency for the ice to freeze in from the sides first, because that's where it's already ice. And as the ice freezes, water expands basically, and it pushes the mud toward the middle. And so in the middle of this big bunch of wet muck that used to be a lake, you start pushing the muck upwards, and the lake, the former lake bed, ends up basically becoming permafrost, but some of it gets squished up and sort of toothpasted up into a mound in the middle. And then that's a bunch of frozen stuff later on. That's a mixture of water, of ice and dirt. So when you see the sides of this, you can't tell from here exactly, but that's as much ice as it is dirt on those cliffs.
So we had to assemble these pack boats when we arrived. We had 3 pack boats, and we put them when you're traveling with them. They're in these big canvas bags, and then we have to take them apart and put them back together. Were you going to say something about that?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's just a process, and you have to do it just right. And zip tie them up. Here's Lyndon zip tying, and because you don't want those things falling apart in rapids, and they're carrying a lot of equipment.
I don't know if we want to mention that we ended up with buying 2 boats from Wilderness Inquiry used, and patching and repairing them in my garage. And then we had 1 solo on hold in case we had an odd number in the end from Brian Johnston, and which we patched up and repaired. It's good shape. So yeah, we had great boats.
And this one Whitney and I bought from Dan Cook. Right here.
So one of the things that may not be obvious to people who aren't tracking this stuff is that I'm not sure why, but in the US, you're not allowed to bring to tie rigid hull boats to the floats of floatplanes anymore. You can still do it in Canada, but for some reason they don't let you do that, and so it forced us to purchase these pack boats that could be torn down and put into a canvas bag and put inside the plane. They're not quite as responsive as a rigid hull boat that most people are used to, but they're pretty decent actually. And we got used to them, and they work pretty well.
We also had spray skirts for all of them, which were Cook Customs on.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
We used those spray skirts. This must have been the morning we were leaving Pingo Lake. I'd say the first 10 days of the trip, every day we had a rainbow or more.
What that means is we also had a lot of rain.
And sun.
And some sun.
I think that some of the rainbows that I saw on that trip had more bands than I've ever seen on rainbows before. Extra little pieces, especially past indigo.
Solitary sandpiper.
Why would there be more levels, more color in the rainbows?
There were just reflections of the rainbow. It was still the same color, rosy bib, but there were just these multiple kind of repetitions.
Oh, gotcha. The background is very dark. You probably, those rainbows look like they were taken first thing in the morning or
Yeah.
late at night, so a lot of dark background, you can see a lot of colors there. Yeah. And you saw how close it was. Yes.
One of the cool things here is you can see them just about any time of day because the sun doesn't so much go up and down. It mostly goes around. So when you see a rainbow, you're always looking straight away from the sun, but you can do that more of the time up there. So you see, and especially when it's a combination of rain and sun every day for a whole bunch of days, you got a lot of opportunities to see them. And so some of them are spectacular and you just mostly would never see them because you'd have to be looking straight down. And there isn't much rain straight down in the ground.
So we did choose to take day hikes on, we tried to bunch a lot of them up towards the beginning of the trip since there was more mountainous terrain up there. And after the group met at Pingo Lake, we took another day before disembarking and heading down the river. And so several of us went up and did a day hike.
Never warm. You could see how we're dressed. It was 40s, 50s.
How about you guys? Were you warm? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you were snug enough.
Yeah, we when we got to this point, we didn't tarry a very long time without moving. You get some sweat on your inner layers, and if you stop moving for very long, then you start getting cold.
And we try, to stop for lunch or a snack, definitely. The puffy came on, winter hat, gloves.
Were you expecting it to be warmer?
And it was.
Uh-oh.
Maybe hoping, but we had adequate gear and
For
expected,
the area, were you expecting it could have been a warm time?
yes, but it could have been a rain, 40 to 60.
So we saw doll sheep was one of the fauna that we saw up there. It's hard to get close enough to them for good pictures, but
Plenty closer.
we saw plenty of evidence of doll sheep. And wolves.
Did you hear the wolves that night?
I did not.
No.
Never did.
So one of the really interesting things on this trip is just about the entire length of the Noatak. Most of our campsites and our lunch spots and places where we'd stop for snacks were gravel bars with a mixture of rock and mud and sand. And so it was really easy to see the sign, as you can see in this photo, either scat or prints from various animals. And I don't think there was a single gravel bar that we landed on that didn't have at least one set of prints, and oftentimes many different kinds of animals, bear and moose and muskox. And we could tell they were fresh because it was raining a fair amount. And so, older tracks were erased by the rain. And so even when we weren't seeing the animals directly, we had the sense that they were all around us.
I think this shot gives a good perspective of the different packing of the canoes. So you can see that canoe in the background. We had to pack it up higher, partly because of the limitations of our food containers. The food containers were loaned to us by the Park Service, I guess you'd say. And that canoe was carrying these rectangular ones that were designed for pack animals. So they had one side of it that was curved for the pack animal and the other side that was flat for the outside. So that was by far the boat with the highest stuff sticking out. And it was a good thing that we had the type of skirt available to do that, because some skirts will not extend that high.
Who did the packing?
We did.
Everybody? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah, well, we packed our own canoes and we ended up staying in the same configuration throughout the trip. We debated whether or not that was the way to go, but because of all the different things, like the personal things you keep near you and you know, access to your camera and how you put the equipment in and all that kind of stuff, was like, why relearn that? So that's what we decided to do, as opposed to, and we had plenty of time to be socializing with other people, you know, outside of the context of the canoeing.
And every 3 days, we switched tents. Tent park.
Yeah. So we have some 3 videos in this presentation. I'm not sure if the people via Zoom are going to be able to hear them, but they're all pretty short videos. So it just gives you a sense of what was going on here. Here's an interview of Lyndon after day 1.
So, Lyndon,
Whitney,
first day on the Noatak.
man, first day on the Noatak.
How was it?
It is nice to be here. And it is a wild place to be. It's beautiful beyond words. And it's great to be here with this great gang. And wow, in one day we've had just about every possible weather already. From sun and rain and cold and wind and calm and vast beauty. So it's a great trip, man.
All right, so I got to get out of here now.
Just advance it
Okay.
and advance it again. There you go. Cotton grass.
Oh, yeah.
Cotton grass. The geologist.
In his
Looking
natural habitat.
Exactly.
What about food? Like who cooked?
Everybody had, was responsible for 4 to 5 breakfasts and dinners. So, if you cooked a dinner, you cooked the following breakfast, and then you had about 4 days off. Then you were back on for a dinner and a breakfast and 4 days off.
And everyone brought their own lunches.
How did you charge your electronic gear?
One person had a solar panel, some of us had batteries that we brought along with us. And we tried to use as little, it was mainly the camera batteries that had to be charged, and those are solar chargers. The phones were, a lot of us had to use those battery packs.
Go back to see if I can get back to full screen here.
Was the water cold?
The water was cold, and we all did have similar foot gear. We all had what's the company?
Choda.
Choda waders that were a neoprene booty that turned into a Gore-Tex waterproof upper that could be cinched up to the hip flexor, and then a paddle boot with mesh that would allow for drainage and kind of a rigid sole was over the neoprene booty. And we all had that, and
I did.
oh, you did not. You had your own versions. But we were all extremely happy to have those. Getting out of the canoe could put you up to, you know, thigh high in water. So
Sorry,
Baz, really quick.
Did you fish?
we did fish. A rod was brought. A license is $125. So it's a bit of an investment. But Whitney did bring tackle, a rod, boy,
Yep.
time gets away from you. But Whitney had one solid day of fishing, and we had one solid night of fish eating.
We have some images of that coming up.
it's a really fast trip.
So that one picture looks like, it doesn't look like droppings, it looks like an animal threw up after eating of another mammal, because I remember teaching about that.
Like an owl pellet?
Oh, that was scat. That was scat.
Wolf scat.
Yeah, wolf scat.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
so there was fur in there.
Yep.
And chips bone.
Ah.
Semi-palmated plover.
Some of that charismatic megafauna.
We were on different hikes and I thought maybe I could disguise and they wouldn't recognize.
Jackalope.
And just before this picture was taken, David and Randee and I were up kind of on a wet plain where we were picking blueberries. And I looked at Randee and I thought I saw a rise of some fur behind her. And then it went a little higher and I said, Randee, bear. And so we started backing out from the area where there was a grizzly bear also eating blueberries, kind of like that children's book, Blueberries for Sal, right?
I talked to him.
Yeah.
I talked to him and he went away.
Except this was a grizzly bear and not interested in us at all, interested in blueberries. And we just kind of backed away and went down to the creek.
This was our lean six. You'll see this in many of the photos. And this was our communal area. Thank you, Randee, for bringing that with. It made such a world of difference for our cooking, for our shelter, for our being able to be sort of more communal. And this is sort of a typical scene. We all had various versions of something to sit on.
And thank you, Dan Cook, for the design.
Indeed.
Fantastic design, and with the weather that we had, we would have been screwed without that thing.
And
It was-
thanks for all the tall people who had tall paddles.
It's another day hike. It's really hard to get a sense of those tussocks from these pictures. There are some pictures of the tussocks later on, but I mean, it makes it look like this is all like a nice grassy park you're going to walk through, but no, this is actually very tussocky and it can be challenging walking. At the top of a day hike.
So did you have hiking poles?
Single hiking poles, yep.
So this is looking down over our campsite, past the river, to a series of lakes on the other side of this valley.
And on the bear spray.
Yeah, we had bear spray that we all had affixed to our belts or on our day packs or very close at hand at all times. Never had to use it, but we were always very aware of bears. So we stopped, you know, we had 23 days on the river, but several of those days were layover days for hiking, and we did more of those at the top of the river than toward the bottom because we were closer to the mountains and it was easier to get to high places from the river. So some of these are shots taken from our day hikes.
This is a typical lunch stop for us. Usually would stop at a gravel bar after several hours of paddling. And this is, you know, everyone gets out their lunch and starts chowing down and maybe does a little bit of resting and exploring. And this is the same scene from a different view. So we got to watch this sort of view at many of our sites for lunch.
We're sitting close together because it allows you to share your tasty cheeses or whatever you've got. You can share around if you're sitting close to one another.
Brett, maybe you want to talk about the change from the really tight valley to as it opened up, and because it's starting to.
Yeah, the valley so far upstream of here has been a classic glacial valley. So river valleys tend to be V-shaped because the river is eroding just right down only where the river is. But when you fill up a valley with hundreds of meters thick of ice everywhere, it's eroding everywhere there's ice. So you end up not with a sort of a single linear place where the valley is getting formed, but a big wide place it's eroding down into the mountains as the mountains are uplifting around it. So you get these big U-shaped valleys. So up to here, we've been in the biggest U-shaped valley, which means that was the biggest of the glaciers back, 10, 20, 100,000 years ago. And then all of the side valleys are also big U-shaped valleys that were also tributary glaciers, just somewhat smaller. And about this point, we started getting out to where it's still all glaciated, but it's not just a big river of ice, or it's a place that didn't have a big confined river of ice that was carving a big U-shaped valley. It's a big broad area that would have had a whole lot of ice that was still flowing and still eroding, but less confined by high mountains. So you get a much broader sort of river basin rather than a more confined valley. So we got a little farther away from the mountains and got good views that way.
It was so much fun to have a geomorphologist on our trip and someone who knows how to teach. And a musician.
And it was fun to have Dhaivyd and his guitar on the trip. That was truly one of the very, very best things of the trip. Dhaivyd bought this travel guitar and would pull it out and serenade us frequently.
Could we hear something from it? Just.
Oh, I see, just a little something. It's not in tune, apparently. So it doesn't have great sound. It doesn't, have the bass, and it doesn't project a lot, but it makes music. So
A lot of sound for a tiny body.
yeah.
The green hump is we would put all our food barrels at night together, and often we had rain every night, so we had a tarp that we would cover the food barrels with. But that's where everything went, down to the toothpaste. Everything was in those barrels when we went to bed.
And we would triangulate the barrels with where we'd make our food, with where our tents were. They all had to be about 100 yards from one another.
Did the bears ever try them?
No,
No, but they there were times when we saw that the bears had dug up the holes with our poop that we had put in there.
Oh, really?
This is one of my favorite photos because it captures this phenomena that we had a lot, this amazingly gorgeous play of light and shadow on the hillside. This was one of the constant beauties that we had to enjoy as we paddled this river.
this bear was seen from the river. David and I dallied, the other boats got the heck downriver, and I pulled out my binoculars. David pulled out his big lensed camera, and but it was 20 yards from us on the shore. It didn't really, saw us, looked at us, got up and walked away.
Bye-bye. It doesn't look so happy though.
Do you have any idea of the age or anything about it? No.
I don't.
Was he bigger than he appears?
No. No, it was not an especially large bear. And shortly after, a very tumultuous day of weather. And when we saw these muskox, it was kind of perfect, right? It was cold, it was rainy, it was windy. And the hair hanging below their belly looks like a car wash thing, I just could not believe how much fur they had. The muskox was extirpated from Alaska. And it wasn't until in the 50s that they brought over some, I think 30 some muskox from Greenland, and were able to repopulate essentially central and western Alaska with muskox. And so that's what we're seeing today is those individuals that have now are derived from that original reintroduction.
And they do look a little bigger than they are because they have a full 6 inches of kivyet surrounding their entire bodies for insulation. So if you imagine 6 inches cut off around everywhere on that, that's the actual body size.
You can imagine how cold it is up there right now and through the winter. Just brutal winter temperatures, and they're the one animal in the Arctic animal that does not need to take shelter even in a blizzard in the Arctic.
Why were they extirpated originally?
Hunting.
Oh.
For what?
For what?
Was it for sport or for meat or?
I don't know
Yeah.
that, but it was in the 1800s, they were hunted to extirpation in Alaska.
This is the sole caribou that we saw on the trip. It hung around our camp for a good 2 hours. And it kind of stayed on the floodplain, but approached periodically. And that's why we got some close-up photos.
Meanwhile, most of the caribou herd is up on the north slope where they spend the summer calving and then spending time in the north slope because it's windier there and they don't get marauded by mosquitoes quite so badly. That happens to be, a lot of it is on the National Petroleum Reserve.
All right, let's see if we can get this to play. See the full screen. Oh.
It's not the right slide, of course.
Technical issues here.
We might want to skip the videos, David, if this always happens when we go to video.
Yeah, I think.
So are these caribou always solitary?
No, that kind of surprised us. But it was not yet migration season either, so they would actually potentially be more solitary until they were joining together for the southern migration, which was not yet in progress, so may not have been unlikely to see that individual alone.
Sorry, we'll get this back to full screen here momentarily. Hopefully. I don't understand what's going on with it here.
So while you do that, David, maybe I'll take one of the questions from the chat. Lisa asks, why can't you drink water from the rivers? And there's actually a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, you always need to be cautious about bacteria in any water you're taking in a wild source like that. But we were unable to take water from the river most of the time because it was extremely turbid. It was very silty. So there was, especially in the upper part of the river, there was a lot of this very, very fine sediment known as glacial flour in the river. And so it would have immediately clogged our filters. So we were always having to find alternative sources, usually a little tributary creek that wasn't as muddy to get our water. And that was actually a huge driver of where we could and could not camp, because it takes a lot of water to camp, to make meals for dinner and breakfast, and then to supply the whole crew with water for the day. And so that was a key factor in where we would select to camp, is some place where we could get water.
Anybody know what kind of bee?
We saw a lot of these bees, and these bees were they didn't move very much. They would sit there sometimes on the ground, sometimes on a flower, and not do a lot of moving. I don't know what kind of bees those are.
David, as you go through these, I'll just, we did have a flower identification book. Randee was especially strong on that, and a lot of the plants that were high frequency, we eventually did come to identify, or Randee and David are both sometimes very dedicated to, on a single outing, we would have seen a bunch of stuff and they would later figure it out back in camp with the books, which was really wonderful.
In Jon's work.
We have no idea what this one is, but it sure is cool looking. See if I can carry
How
on
many
that.
lenses were you carrying, David?
I had 3 lenses.
David didn't take any clothes or any gear, he just took cameras.
I did not have the macro lens. I used my one of my telephoto lenses as a macro lens. Whitney was the one with the macro lens. What's going on here?
Eventually, we left the mountains kind of entirely and got into this more, we're not talking maybe 2,000, 2,500 feet in elevation in this area of the river. It was never overly monotonous. There was constantly change, and on the river itself with its meanderings and finding the deepest channel to kind of follow the meandering. But we're now well out of the Brooks Range itself, and into the tundra.
This was an endlessly fun river to paddle. Very fast flowing river, so the current was extremely strong. Big wide meanders. And as John said, we were always having to follow the Thalweg, or the fastest flowing part of the river. And you could tell if you weren't in the fastest flowing part of the river, because another canoe would be like speeding past you at twice the speed you were doing. And so we were always having to kind of find that fastest flow, which took a lot of attention. It was very fun river to paddle.
So is that Randy's tent you were talking about from the backside there?
Yes, that is the lean six, yes.
Okay. Whole different perspective from there.
Yeah. Lunch break.
Actual nap.
Getting any warmer down?
Yes.
We had some days that got up to about 70, several days that were up to 70.
That's a nice.
This was a typical view of when we arrived at a site and we're trying to determine whether or not we wanted to stay there. People would go off and look for water and look for campsites and look for sites where we could be putting the equipment and where we could be, setting up the lean six. And you can tell that this is what is happening here because everyone is 6 feet apart and everyone is thoughtful.
Yeah.
Coming back to report what we found about, whether we're going to stay at this site.
So it's not an album?
Should be. I guess we decided to stay.
Well, Whitney, you can tell that.
Yeah, so this is, I think maybe we skipped the video here, David, just because it seems to throw off the slideshow, but this was a photo of me taken by Lyndon, I think. The rest of the group went off on this day to do a day hike, and I decided to stay behind. We were camped at the mouth of this tributary creek, and I knew that would be good fishing. You can see, if you look closely there, you can see the different colors of the water there. The water closer to shore, closer to the foreground, is the clear water coming in from the tributary, and then you've got the light blue, more turbid water of the Noatak out in the center of the channel. And so I just cast a Rapala out there right along that eddy line, right along that seam, and caught some big fish out there. And I found it very difficult to stop because it was so fun. But of course, you don't want to take more than you need. So on the left there, those are two Dhaivyd, which are the riverine form of the Arctic char, and then on the right is a Arctic grayling. And the Dhaivyd are actually much larger. The scale of these photos makes it appear that they're similar size, but the big one on the left photo there was probably, we can tell kind of by the Leatherman for comparison, but that was probably, I don't know, 12 pounds or something like that. And those four fish fed us for lunch and dinner, 5 of us. David wasn't eating fish, but oops. Oh, that worked.
It worked. That's Whitney making the fish. There was a lot of it.
So this is our good
Mascot.
mascot, Karen. Caron, who for decades has been accompanying us and keeping us out of bear trouble. So we brought him along this time, and every night we would unpack him and put him by the lean six, and he did his job, and we stayed bear safe the whole trip.
How big is that thing?
About
Oh,
5
it
inches.
has on the back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Karen traveled in my food barrel, so I was responsible for getting him in and out.
But Karen on this trip was resexed and is now a they. It's a hard habit to break there, Whitney,
Yeah, sorry.
calling them a he.
Oh.
We saw there were a pair of these on the shore. And at the time we were debating, are those foxes or are they wolf pups? And Whitney did some research and decided that they are indeed foxes.
Apparently that's still in dispute, but I'm sticking to my story.
Bear. Another day hike.
So this day we hiked from the river up to this promontory that also had a geologic survey marker, and it was named on the map. It was called Windy, Windy, and it was windy up there. But from here, we had a nice vantage point looking down to the beginning of the Grand Canyon of the Noatak. Or
kinda
maybe it
makes
was
you
Noatak
wonder-
Canyon.
It makes you wonder what the picture looks like that Lyndon might be taking. Well, you don't have to wonder.
Lunch at the top.
Shirt sleeves. No mosquito netting.
No,
No, really, once we were on the Noatak, there was very little need for the mosquito netting.
You can see the canyon there.
This is just the beginning of the canyon. We weren't actually into it yet. We could just see it from this day hike.
Are those trees or shrub trees?
They're
Shrub
trees.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What is-
so we're getting low enough that we were beginning to see, spruces around and larger poplars.
So what is timberline there?
In terms of,
I mean, what's the height of land or trees beyond which
It's
trees can
probably-
grow?
it's more indistinct than that, I think.
Mhm.
I don't think it's a particular elevation necessarily. We would probably.
but we were below the Arctic Circle when we started seeing black or white spruce or the poplars.
No, we were still above.
We're still above the.
Oh, we were.
It's just- My question was about altitude, but maybe that's not relevant.
It was really more about latitude.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 feet probably at this point.
And what's the bedrock at that point that's being eroded?
Did you hear that question, Brad?
I think Brad may have had to step away briefly.
No, I'm back.
Oh, okay.
Yes, the answer is yes.
And
This
what's
is
the
only-
bedrock that is, the Grand Canyon is eroded through?
What?
No.
Oh, that's a much longer answer. That is, okay, so the Brooks Range is a mountain range because of a collision between a piece of continental crust that is now Alaska north of the Brooks Range and an island arc that was a subduction zone. I'll not try to go back to introductory earth science to explain those terms if you don't know them, but if you do, a subduction zone, which is, semi-continental crust too light, too low density to be subducted. When it runs into a bit of continental crust, it gets squished on there, and there's a big collision, not quite as severe as the collision that's causing something like the Himalayas, but this would have been a pretty big mountain range at the time, and still is a decent sized mountain range, because this didn't happen all that long ago geologically, even if it's a very, very long time ago. And in this collision between the subduction zone and a bit of continental crust, a bit of oceanic crust and oceanic mantle got caught up in the collision and squished up, kind of squeezed up and deposited up on the upper parts of the crust where it's now been exposed. So we are seeing some very dense, heavy, metal-rich kind of rock that you very, very rarely see on continents. And there was some of it nearby that we only saw a little evidence of. It's actually from deep in the mantle in this situation, in this continental crust getting squished up onto the, or sorry, oceanic crust and mantle getting squished up on top of the continental crust. So there's some really deep parts of the earth that are up on top of the crust here and exposed and getting eroded into. That's why it's got the funny color. It's dark because it's really heavy in iron and magnesium. And so that's oceanic, if not mantle, deep crust at least.
Thank you.
Do we know what Randy's?
Well, I gotta tell you, you know, you don't know what you look like. You always have to say, how do I look today? And I just remember Jon, when we showed up at the hostel, probably in Kotzebue, and took a shower, and he goes, oh my God, you look like you're hot. Obviously.
And I have slept in the tent with her many nights.
These guys showed up one morning across the river from our campsite, and we didn't see them at first. We heard the snort and looked over there, and there they were, just across the river. They're musk oxen. This is entering the canyon in the rain. You can see our hoods are up. And this was something we saw kind of regularly. This river was very windy, and you'd come up around a bend and not really know what you were going to see on just around the bend. And there were many, many rapids on this river. No real gnarly, scary rapids, but rapids nonetheless that you had to pay attention to. You had to keep your wits about you. You know, some rapids you have to get out and scout them. We didn't have to do that on this trip. We would, usually just one or two of us would stand up in the boat and try to get a good look of what the line might be and where there might be an area where we had to do some tricky paddling, and mostly just aim for the V's for where most of the water was in the river. So it was a lot of fun to paddle.
But there was the alleged ledge. So in the descriptions, we were reading all about this ledge that we had to be careful of, because the ledge would, toss the boats into a big, wall and made a quick 90-degree turn. And so we kept looking for the alleged ledge and never knew where that was.
So class two, some class two?
Yeah, some class 2, a lot of class 1.
It's a golden eagle. We didn't get any good shots of them, but we saw them occasionally.
A lot of us had neoprene paddling gloves, which were great for warmth, but certainly hand moisturizing was crucial. And several of the paddlers had split thumbs and forefingers on the pad just from dry hands, and for some it was quite painful. So we were passing around hand moisturizer often, and that was a bit of a surprise.
And taping our fingers every morning.
This is getting down to Noatak, towards Noatak Village now. I think was this our final campsite? Where
Yeah.
This bear was sniffing us out from across the river. And here we are in Noatak. Wait. You want to
I'll go
start
ahead.
now, or because we have the pictures that I added today a little later on? But
Well, I can tell the
You just
Noatak
start-
Village,
yes, you-
so we arrived at Noatak Village and there was talk ahead of time about what we were gonna find and what this place was like. I'm just gonna read this. Before flying out of Fairbanks, I contacted Robert and Logie, Sheldon and Sonny and Mary Russell, two couples who Nancy and I had met in Kotzebue after our 2017 Coca-Cola trip. Sonny and Mary lived in Kotzebue. Sonny had invited us then to his home for a fresh fish dinner after chatting while he was cleaning his nets and filleting fish with his ulu knife for his sled dogs he raced in the Iditarod, and of course to eat. And he and Mary introduced us to their friends at the dinner, Robert and Logie Sheldon. At dinner, Robert and Logie offered their home for Nancy and I to stay in Noatak Village if we'd ever decided to do the Noatak River. So I mailed out cards to them when we were in Fairbanks, and through my inReach, Robert sent me this message. Son Michael in Noatak, fine with troops showing up on August 8th or 9th. He and Darcy will be at work. House is only 2-story near river on north side of town. House isn't locked. You're welcome to use bathrooms, towels, and laundry. Yellow Chevy parked next to the house. So our troop arrived at the docks of Noatak River, greeted by a fisherman checking his boats. He helped us ferry across to get our gear. This is when we learned that gasoline was around $13 a gallon.
Wow.
Tough. At Robert and Logie's homestead, we found the yellow Chevy, an outside protective dog on a chain, and a dog inside the house, eager for us to pet her. With Logie's health compromised, they were not staying in the village, but instead close to Kotzebue and health services. Their son Michael and his partner Darcy live in the homestead now. Hauling our gear to the house by foot, most of us never made it all the way without being offered a ride on a local's 4-wheeler. Darcy and Michael came home in the afternoon from their jobs at the school. Michael is an assistant teacher for special needs child, and Darcy works in the office. Darcy brought me over to the kitchen area and showed me where everything was for cooking, table setting, and how to operate the stoves. In the 2 days we were with them, Darcy made sure we had what we needed and taught us how to manage the water, toilet, dogs, etc. Michael offered their 4-wheeler to drive to the post office to mail a lot of our gear, and the last morning to the airstrip for flying out to Kotzebue. The following day, I hiked to the new school for a visit.
We'll catch up to that picture momentarily, but it's just a few shots of the village.
Wow.
Passing by the post office to drop things off, the post office attendant gave me a ride on her 4-wheeler as she needed to head that way anyway. We passed the old school building and health clinic on the way to the beautiful new buildings. Many times folks expressed their pride in these two facilities, and especially the importance to raise children with a good education and the skills needed to contribute to a meaningful life for their community. At the school, I was free to walk through the elementary and secondary sections. Emma Shiloh walked with me, sharing stories of her education there. She recalled a past science teacher that was her favorite because he took them outdoors to the tundra to learn survival, the plants, and the animals. She also shared that she really enjoyed caribou hunting and eating Eskimo ice cream. And I can't remember what Eskimo ice cream is, but she told me. Anyway, reading bios on the wall, the principal was a past student of Noatak, as well as a woman who returned after getting her degree as a dentist. Walking back, I got a ride from a parent. She spoke of the tough schedule for folks working at the mine, 2 weeks on, 1 week gone, getting enough teachers, and the only crime is fuel theft. And it is not only crazy expensive, but also hard to get enough to their village by boat and plane. The last night, Michael stayed and had dinner with us, answering our 1,000 questions about daily seasonal life at Noatak. My favorite story was how he hunted caribou. the season just a few weeks off. He explained they go upriver from Noatak where the caribou cross. Once in the river, the hunters corral the caribou, picking out the ones that they want to take. They can fit up to 17 caribou in a boat. If they take caribou on land, they clean and cut the animal in half, cover themselves in plastic to keep the blood off themselves, and 2 people carry it out on their back with the legs around their neck. As you can imagine, they prefer taking the caribou from the river. Early the next morning, we carry our remaining gear to the airstrip to fly out of Noatak to Kotzebue. Whitney drives Michael's 4-wheeler to take packs. I put a pack on my back and start walking in the early August Arctic light. Just past the post office, a man walks up his driveway to the main road, dangling his keys in front of me, saying, "It's a good day to help someone." I tell him, "It's okay, I've got it." He repeats, "It's a good day to help someone." I accepted his offer for a ride to the airstrip. As I got off, I offer him money for gas. He refuses, saying, "I cannot. I would offend my ancestors if I took money from you." The Kotzebue, that one slide of, this was actually in the museum, I think in Kotzebue. And this is the kind of messages I kept hearing at the school, and obviously this man, that they must teach our children Nipmuc values. And I can't say this right, but Inupiaq is the word of the peoples of the northern part of Alaska. It's that gray area, and it's all the way, it reaches all the way into Canada. And so it's the Inuit people of that region of the north. And when I was with Logie and Mary in 2017, they talked about taking their snow machines and traveling all the way to Canada. And they were so surprised to learn that they could understand the language of the people in Canada, the Inuit. But they couldn't understand the language of all those other people in the southern Alaska. So that circumpolar piece has a common language. So on the way to Kotzebue, I sent a photo to Robert and Logie of our group with Darcy and Michael and the child David at their house. He wrote, "Thank you, Randee. I was glad when Michael eagerly accepted having the group drop in for a couple of days. This has been a delight for us. As in past years, we would welcome travelers. Now to see Michael and Darcy carry on with the same joy brings a certain gladness." We met Sonny Russell in Kotzebue. And when we flew from the Noatak Village, he told us Mary had passed away in May. He no longer races in the Iditarod nor has a dog team. After a visit together, he offered to carry us and all of our gear to the airport in the morning, headed to Anchorage in his truck. How lives change in 5 years. The t-shirt.
Yeah, Randee gave us all t-shirts at the end of the trip.
Nancy is, and her husband are kind of graphic artists, so that was kind of gift from the 3 of us.
This is the fancy restaurant in Kotzebue. And I just like that, I like that we're at the Friends Meeting House here, and this was Friends Way because the Quakers were very prominent up there. And in fact, we learned that we ended up staying at a hotel that was a relatively, maybe a 4-star hotel or something up there. But we learned that we could have stayed at the Friends Meeting House there.
Yeah, Sonny Russell is a friend. And he said, "Why did you stay at the hotel? You could have stayed at our home."
So this is
Play the
the
video.
Yeah, we can try this video. This is back, we flew out of Anchorage. So we flew into Fairbanks and out of Anchorage and had a day or so there to explore. And we went down to, what's the name of that park? Kincaid Park. just south of the city, and John went on a bike ride and caught this moose cow.
Coastal bike path. That's, kind of Anchorage's greenway. And there's moose everywhere. Bike from the hospital.
Saw moose tracks all the time on our paddling. Never saw a moose until Anchorage.
All right, I think that is all the slides.
Awesome. Really.
So folks, you're welcome to leave, you have refreshments, stay around and chat. Maybe we take a couple questions if there are a couple questions from anyone. Yeah.
Do the peat fires have anything to do with the permafrost? No, the warming of the permafrost?
I don't have a good answer for that. I'm presuming that they are more able to burn with the brine and the warming. I'm not an authority. Questions here, or I don't know if there are questions, Whitney, from folks.
Yeah, there was one other question that I saw in the chat. People who are online can feel free to unmute and ask questions or add them to the chat. But one question from early in the slideshow that we didn't get to is why was the water too low to land at the 12-mile landing spot? I think it was just less water, less snow
Thank
last
you all
winter.
for being here, and I know any of us be happy to chat with anybody here. Any questions?
Any questions from anybody from our remote audience?
Thanks, Andy.
I don't know if you can see it. I think so. We should mute here, I think.
All right, let's chat.
I think that because we have so much activity going on at this end, it's going to be hard to continue with the Zoom from our end. So we can keep recording if you wanted to ask it or answer questions there, but I think we might have to end the recording session anyway.
Yeah, thank you
makes
so
sense.
much for the wonderful program. Really appreciated that. It was neat to see.
Glad you
Thank
could
you
join,
all.
Lois.
Yeah, it was really fun. So thanks.
Thank you all.
Good night.
Good to see you, Brad.
You all too.
Can I wave?
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey,
Hello.
glad you guys could join.
Yeah.